So in the last class, we discussed Stephen's aesthetic theory, where Stephen described, or rather defined, the three terms: consonantia, integritas, consonantia, and claritas, in which he is following St. Thomas Aquinas, but his ideas, as we will see, do not exactly conform to those of Aquinas. So the last quality of a work of art, which is claritas, that is the most elusive quality. Claritas means illumination, where the whole object becomes clear to us in our apprehension. So Stephen describes it as the instant wherein that supreme quality of beauty, the clear radiance of the aesthetic image, is apprehended luminously by the mind, which has been arrested by its wholeness and fascinated by its harmony, is the luminous silent stasis of aesthetic pleasure, a spiritual state very like to that cardiac condition which the Italian physiologist Luigi Galvani, using a phrase almost as beautiful as Shelley's, called the enchantment of the heart. So in this description of claritas, we see all his arguments about a work of art contained within this, that the apprehension of a work of art or the beauty of a work of art is luminous. It is some kind of illumination in our apprehension. Secondly, silence, the mind is arrested by the silent stasis of aesthetic pleasure. So aesthetic pleasure does not lead us to any kind of activity, any kind of desire that propels us to act. On the other hand, aesthetic pleasure leads us to a moment of stasis, like a moment of meditation or contemplation, compared to a spiritual state. And then Stephen talks about, now just let me mention that in his earlier draft, Stephen Hero, Stephen writes, claritas is quidditas, that is the whatness of a thing, that is claritas, which means that when one apprehends the whatness or the essence of a thing, that is claritas, that gives one a sense of illumination. Then he goes on to talk about the three different forms of poetry. If you bear this in memory, you will see that art necessarily divides itself into three forms, progressing from one to the next. These forms are the lyrical form, the form wherein the artist presents his image in immediate relation to himself. So the lyric presents the subjective feeling of the artist, so in immediate relationship to himself. The epical forms, the form wherein he presents his image in immediate relation to himself and to others. So the subjectivity of the artist is mediated via the others. So the epic form takes into consideration not only the self but also the others. The dramatic form, the form wherein he presents his image in immediate relation to others. So in the dramatic form, the self is kind of effaced, because only the others are present and the others come alive. So Stephen defines it as the artist presenting his image in immediate relationship to others. So there is no mediation. As in the epic form there is a mediation, but in the dramatic form the artist seems to speak through others. And these three forms, Stephen says, are in a progression, which means the lyric is the preliminary or the most primitive form, also the most simple, after which the epic is a little more complicated, and then the dramatic, which is the most complicated and the most difficult form to achieve. So when we speak of Stephen's aesthetic theory, we have to not only talk about the three qualities of work of art, we also have to talk about these things, his comments on the forms of art, and also how he defined pity and terror. So all these things should be included in a discussion on Stephen's aesthetic theory. This discussion goes on, and then Stephen explains that how these forms emerge from one another. The complex form emerges from the simpler form. The simplest epical form is seen emerging out of lyrical literature when the artist prolongs and broods upon himself as the center of an epical event, and this form progresses till the center of emotional gravity is equidistant from the artist himself and from others. So in the lyric form, the emotional gravity is centered in the artist. In the epical form, it becomes equidistant from the artist and the others. The narrative is no longer purely personal. The personality of the artist passes into the narration itself, the epic form, flowing round and round the persons and the action like a vital sea. This progress you will see easily in that Old English ballad Turpin Hero, which begins in the first person and ends in the third person. So Turpin Hero is a ballad praised by Sir Philip Sidney also in his apology for poetry, and Joyce also praises it here through Stephen. But notice that this ballad begins in the first person and ends in the third person, which means that it is a progression from the lyrical form to the epical form. Now it is interesting that this novel begins in the third person and ends in the first person. That is just the opposite of this progression. Why? Because in the novel is in third person, as the epic form, which is a narration, is in third person. So the novel is supposed to be in the third person. But since it is a novel about the development of a psyche, therefore at the end of the novel, when the hero attains his adult psyche, his mature psyche, then he begins to write in a journal in the first person, indicating that he has attained the maturity of his psyche. Some comments here on the artist. The personality of the artist, at first a cry or a cadence or a mood, and then a fluid and lambent narrative, finally refines itself out of existence, impersonalizes itself, so to speak. The aesthetic image in the dramatic form is life purified in and reprojected from the human imagination. The mystery of aesthetic, like that of material creation, is accomplished. The artist, like the god of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, wearing his fingernails. So this paragraph basically explains the progression of artistic form from the lyrical to the epical to the dramatic. And when it reaches the dramatic form, then the artist is totally absent, he is invisible. So here we find an idea which is often used with reference to Shakespeare, that Shakespeare completely effaces himself from his art, from his drama. So we tend to look for him in the sonnets, but in the drama there is no sign of Shakespeare. So the characters take over. This idea of the artist like God the Creator, who is invisible in this world but yet felt everywhere. This idea is also popularized by Flaubert, the French novelist. Flaubert says the artist should exist in his work as God exists in creation, invisible and all-powerful, felt everywhere but visible nowhere. So all these I have WhatsApp to you this morning, the notes from which I will be reading from time to time. So these are my personal notes for teaching in the class, but since I cannot do the board work here, so I have sent you the WhatsApp image. This is Joyce, we see here, is following a theory which has also been taken from Mallarmé, and in one of his notebooks he writes down a quotation from Mallarmé, the French poet. Mallarmé writes, "Abolished the pretension, aesthetically an error, despite its dominion over almost all the masterpieces, to enclose within the subtle paper other than, for example, the horror of the forest or the silent thunder afloat in the leaves, not the intrinsic dense wood of the trees." So Mallarmé suggests that art does not convey the gross, material reality, but it conveys the emotion imbued or immersed in that reality. So it does not convey the representation of the dense wood, but the horror in the forest or the emotion that is there, that should be conveyed by the artist. The language, according to Mallarmé, is meant to evoke, not to describe, to recreate in the mind of the reader the impression or emotion received or felt by the writer. Now this is kind of theory which was behind the symbolist poetry of France, and the theory that is directly opposed to it is the real theory of realism, particularly the slice of life theory. In direct opposition to this theory stood the ideas, the relation of slice of life school, according to which the wood of the trees and all the other visible facts should be described with precision. Joyce alternates between the two opposing modes. Richard Ellman says that Joyce deliberately leaves loose ends of narrative so that his books, like life, give the impression of having many threads that we cannot follow. Then from the paragraph, after 1 or 2 pages, towards dawn he awoke. From this paragraph onwards, the development of Stephen as a poet is indicated. Oh, what sweet music, his soul was all dewy wet, over his limbs in sleep, pale cool waves of light had passed. He lay still as if his soul lay amid cool waters, conscious of faint, sweet music. His mind was waking slowly to a tremulous morning knowledge, a morning inspiration. A spirit filled him, pure as the purest water, sweet as dew, moving as music. But how faintly it was in breathe, how passionately, as if the seraphim themselves were breathing upon him. His soul was waking slowly, fearing to awake wholly. It was the windless hour of dawn, when madness wakes and strange plants open to the light, and the moth flies forth silently. So this is more or less a kind of stream of consciousness description of the mind being under the spell of inspiration, the Platonic theory of inspiration, which is a trance-like state. And he speaks about this instance of virgin inspiration. Now, Inspiration always comes at an instance. As Joyce had explained in Stephen Hero, the idea of epiphany. Epiphany is an illumination, a sudden illumination at an instance. For in the virgin womb of the imagination the Word was made flesh. Gabriel the seraph had come to the Virgin's chamber, and after a glow deepened within his spirit, whence the white flame had passed, deepening to a rose and ardent light. That rose and ardent light was a strange willful heart, strange that no man had known or would know, willful from before the beginning of the world, and lured by that ardent rose-like glow, the choirs of the seraphim were falling from heaven. So it is an attempt to imagine the Immaculate Conception of Virgin Mary, which here for Stephen stands for a parable of the moment of creation. So just like God entered the womb of Virgin Mary and made her pregnant, similarly inspiration enters a poet and makes him write poetry. One page later, Stephen remembers his meeting with Emma Clary. Now both of them are older than at the beginning of the novel. She was dancing towards him, and as she came, her eyes were a little averted and a faint glow was on her cheek. At the pause in the chain of hands, her hand had lain in his an instant, a soft merchandise. Her hand lay in Stephen's hand for an instant, but describe it as a soft merchandise, that is very strange. Merchandise means a commodity. You are a great stranger now. Yes, I was born to be a monk. I am afraid you are a heretic. Are you much afraid? For answer she had danced away from him along the chain of hands, dancing lightly and discreetly, giving herself to none. The white spray nodded to her dancing, and when she was in shadow, the glow was deeper on her cheek. I think that this part of the narration refers to Stephen's dream, and critics say that it is a wet dream. That is, young boys often dream of sexual experience, and Stephen is dreaming of Emma Clary, but we see that the image of Emma is again being mixed up with Ireland and with the Roman Catholic Church. So whether he would be a monk or not, that idea here by association brings the idea of the church. But he had done well to leave the room in disdain. He had done well not to salute her on the steps of the library. He had done well to leave her to flirt with her priest, to toy with a church which was the scullery made of Christendom. So in this passage we also see Stephen's final rejection of the girl. Stephen dislikes Emma Clary at this point because she would go to a priest, probably ignorant priest, and confess. So Roman Catholic, in Roman Catholicism, confession is ritual, common ritual, but Stephen won't accept it at all. That she would go to some ignorant priest rather than come to him, and the priest serves a church, the Irish Roman Catholic Church, which he considers to be the scullery made of Christendom. So it has no dignity at all. So this also indicates Stephen's attitude towards Ireland. He had told himself bitterly as he walked through the streets that she was a figure of the womanhood of her country, a bat-like soul waking to the consciousness of itself in darkness and secrecy and loneliness, tarrying a while, loveless and sinless, with her mild lover, and leaving him to whisper of innocent translations in the latticed ear of a priest. A priest hears the confession from behind a lattice, and a girl who would speak of her transgressions, her sins, to a priest from behind a lattice. So that is not at all acceptable to Stephen, and Stephen in his mind identifies her with the bat-like soul of Irish women, to which we have found reference earlier when Devin, his friend Devin, spoke of the Irish peasant woman, waiting for him and offering herself to him. There also we notice this use of the idea of the bat-like soul. So a bat is similar to a bird, that a bat also flies, but it is restricted. Its flight is restricted, and therefore a bat stands for Stephen as a negative image that stands for a failure of escaping the ugliness and the meanness of this Irish Roman Catholic world. Then again he thinks of the Eucharist, the radiant image of the Eucharist. He had written verses for her again after 10 years. 10 years before she had worn her shawl cowl-wise about her head, sending sprays of her warm breath into the night air, tapping her foot upon the glassy road. So you see, in Stephen's psyche, a memory from 10 years back is still alive as if it is in the present. It was the last tram. The lank brown horse knew it and shook their bells to the clear night in admonition. So the memory of the farewell, of the parting of ways in front of the last tram, that memory is again evoked. She came up to his step many times between their phrases and went down again, and once or twice remained beside him, forgetting to go down, and then went down. Let be, let be. So we remember that this scene was depicted much earlier in the novel, and Stephen could not kiss the girl at that moment, though it appeared that the girl was eager. And later he wrote a poem in which what was restrained by one was given by both, or yielded to by both in the poem. So the purpose of evoking this memory once again is to suggest the continuity of Stephen's psyche. So the motifs which are repeated in the novel, a great number of motifs are repeated in the novel, giving the reader the conviction that it is the story of one person, it is the story of Stephen, and his memory, though it travels back and forth between past and present, yet it provides a kind of continuity or kind of thread. And it also indicates the progress of Stephen's soul or Stephen's psyche from his childhood to his young adulthood. And then there is this villanelle that Stephen wrote, and this villanelle is kept hanging. There is no comment on this. So we do not know whether Stephen succeeds as a poet or not. In the absence of authorial comments, and even there is no comment on it by any character or by Stephen himself. So even though in this novel there is no indication whether Stephen succeeds as a poet or not, but in Ulysses once again Stephen appears as a character, and there he is represented as a failed poet, which in French phrase, a poet manqué, means a failed poet. So there will be an acute accent on the first E, which I cannot write here. I think I made a spelling mistake. So it is QUW. So a failed poet. And since many of us are failed poets, therefore we should rather learn this phrase. Okay. Then Stephen looks at the swallows. So here comes the swallow symbol or bird symbolism. What birds were they? He stood on the steps of the library and looked at them, leaning wearily on his ash plant. So they flew round and round and so on. He watched their flight, bird after bird, a dark flash, a swerve, flash again, a dart aside, a curve, a flutter of wings. He tried to count them. So what is the significance of the swallow symbol? So it reminds him that he must escape. As the rose symbol in this novel suggests a significant progress in the development of Stephen's psyche, the bird symbol always suggests the idea of escape, flying away from the filthiness, from the ugliness of the world. And in this chapter here it is important because at the end of the novel we see Stephen prepares himself for his exile. He decides to leave the country. So the swallow symbol stands for a kind of premonition or an indication of what is going to come. A scene of fear of unknown moved in the heart of his weariness, a fear of symbols and portents, of the hawk-like man whose name he bore, soaring out of his captivity on osier-woven wings of thought, the god of writers, writing with a reed upon a tablet and bearing on his narrow iris head the cast moon. So allusion to Daedalus, the Greek artist who created artificial wings and flew out of the labyrinth which he himself had created for restraining the Minotaur. Therefore, the image of the artist always has with it some risk, some danger also associated with it, because we know that Daedalus was imprisoned and then he escaped, and his son Icarus fell into the sea and died. So an artist always runs some risk, and Stephen is thinking of this, and the image of Thoth, the Norse god of writing, which we have seen was alluded to in the bird girl image. And this reference to the god of writing suggests that Stephen would end up being a writer, but he is at the moment apprehensive. Again the swallows, and here is I think the wet dream of Stephen. A soft liquid joy like the noise of many waters flowed over his memory, and he felt in his heart the soft peace of silent spaces, of fading tenuous sky above the waters, of oceanic silence, of swallows flying through the sea dusk over the flowing waters. Notice the repeated use of the water image, and as I told you that according to Jungian theory of archetypes, water is the mother archetype. So it stands for creativity, it stands for fertility, creativity, generation. A soft liquid joy flowed through the words where the soft long vowels hurtled noiselessly and fell away, lapping and flowing back and ever shaking the white bells of their waves in mute chime and mute peal and soft low swooning cry. So you can see that these are indications of some kind of sexual orgasm, and he felt that the augury he had sought in the wheeling, darting birds and in the pale space of sky above him had come forth from his heart like a bird from a turret quietly and swiftly. So the birds are a projection of his emotions. Okay, so we will kind of stop our reading of the text here. I just tell you to look at the diary jottings at the end of the novel, and the last sentence of the novel, 27 April, old father, old artificer, stand we now and ever in good stead. So Stephen remembers Daedalus, the ancient artist who should help him, or Stephen prays for his help or his aid in his pursuit of art. So that is the only indication at the end of the novel that Stephen is going to lead the life of an artist. So now let us look at the questions. A portrait as a Künstler Roman, or a novel of growth. So here you will have to first speak about the genre of Bildungsroman, which meant a novel of education or a novel of growth of a child. Künstler Roman means a kind of novel where the growth of an artist is described. So in this novel we see Stephen, the protagonist, is a young boy or a young child who has been described in the novel, beginning from his infancy or embryonic state through his entire childhood up to his university days, and finally when he is a young adult thinking of choosing a profession and leaving his country. So basically you have to make some comments on the generic qualities of the novel and indicate through the description of Stephen at various stages in his life how it is a novel of growth. A portrait as an autobiography. This question I don't think is very important. Only few critics speak of the life of James Joyce and how Joyce actually represents his own childhood in Stephen. In almost all respects, Stephen is similar to Joyce. Like Stephen, like Joyce, Stephen has a great number of siblings, a great number of brothers and sisters. Like Joyce, Stephen had an initial obsession with his mother, but later, as he found his mother to be more and more religious type, since he developed a hatred for religion, so he became distant from his mother. And later in the novel, we see a conflict with his mother when his mother asks him to do Easter duty. He refuses, saying non serviam. Non serviam is the speech of Satan in the Bible, who refused to serve God. Stephen's father is also very similar to Joyce's father, and his jovial nature, his politics, his poverty, his his temperament, everything is an imitation of Joyce's father. Simon Daedalus is very much like Joyce's father. Then Joyce's school days in Jesuit-run schools exactly are described in the school days of Stephen. Narrative structure. So here you will have to talk of the pattern of the novel. So the note, in one of the notes that I sent you today, where you find that I have written in very small hand. I apologize for that. There I have given the, I have written something on structure, and I will read out the last paragraph, which is almost illegible. So each of his major books has a precise structure. Joyce spoke of a portrait as a novel in 5 chapters. The book is constructed in 5 similar sections. Hugh Kenner says that the action of the 5 chapters is really the same action. All the chapters are on a note of equilibrium, end on a note of equilibrium or stasis. Kenner claims that each chapter begins with a series of thematic statements. The themes of paternity, religion, song, punishment, and apology are all presented in the first 2 pages. So the first 2 pages of the novel contain all these themes, which are repeated in course of the novel in the different chapters. So I have already discussed it, how we see that in every chapter a crisis develops and then the crisis is resolved at the end of the chapter. And that is why critics commented that the novel has a structure like a spiral because it is repetitive, it is circular in pattern. So every chapter begins with a new crisis and ends with its resolution, and in the next chapter another new crisis develops and it ends with a resolution, and so on. Chapter 1 deals with Stephen's childhood in Bray and Clongoes and ends with his victory over Father Dolan. So Father Dolan, who punished him physically with his bandy bat, and Stephen complained to the rector. Chapter 2, events in Blackrock, Dublin, Belvedere College and Cork. Stephen's alienation from his family culminates in his visit to a prostitute, a swoon of sin, moment of stasis. Chapter 3, 7 deadly sins, hellfire sermon. So there are a number of sermons in this chapter. Chapter 4, Stephen leads a holy life, university, ends with the Birdwell stasis. In one of his early notebooks, Joyce defined a portrait as the curve of an emotion. Now I have written here everywhere a portrait with small p, but since I am referring to the novel's title, so it should be capital A and capital P. Defined a portrait as the curve of an emotion. The 5 chapters present 5 versions of the same curve. Chapter 5 begins with sordidness of his home, conversation with Devin on national politics, with the Dean on art, science lecture is represented here, Joyce's dissatisfaction as a medical student, with Cranley on international politics, with Lynch on art, with Cranley on religion. Stephen must accept his position as an exile. The novel ends in stasis. Stephen prepares to leave his country. Right. So this is perhaps useful in writing on the structure of the novel, which we find is very well thought out. Narrative strategy and point of view. So the narration is third-person narration, but the third-person narration gives the impression of the first person, and this is a technique which Joyce learned from. Flaubert, the French novelist, who in Madame Bovary presents the narrative in the third person, but it gives us the impression as if we are looking through Madame Bovary's point of view. Here, Stephen follows that to a great extent. Then, at the end of the novel, he uses first person point of view when there are we see the diary jottings by Stephen indicating the maturity of his psyche. Blending of two styles, stream of consciousness with realism. So, the novel is not written purely in the stream of consciousness technique. So, even though Joyce uses the stream of consciousness to a great extent, but we see that after representing Stephen's psyche and representing his emotions, passions, which reach a peak, after that there is a fall from that emotional peak when the author switches from stream of consciousness to realistic style. And then we always see that the realism represented is often of a kind of naturalistic representation, description of food or description of the different sensory experiences, olfactory, visual, and so on, auditory and so on. So, a great number of sensory stimuli, how they create the realistic impression. So these two styles are alternated in the novel. Use of symbolism. So here you will have to speak about some of the significant symbols used by Joyce. For example, the rose symbol. So we have to talk about, initially we see white rose and red rose when the father divides the class into two groups and they are made to compete. And then Stephen is not interested in that competition and he thinks of the green rose. But the green rose is not there in nature, so it is a product of his imagination. So the rose symbol is repeated throughout the novel, and the ultimate expression is that of the rose of light, which is an allusion to Dante's description of the beatific vision in paradise. So this rose of light, which is a symbolical expression of God in Dante, in Stephen it becomes an expression or a symbol of his replacement of or substitution of religion by art. Rose symbol, then bird symbols. You have to talk about the different bird symbols, symbols of flight, use of myth and archetype. So the Daedalus myth, which begins right from the epigraph quotation from Ovid's Metamorphoses, then throughout the novel, and the last sentence of the novel again comes back to the Daedalus myth. So Daedalus myth is used to represent the artist figure who stands for a protest against all kinds of restrictions. So man cannot fly, but Daedalus made it possible for man to fly by inventing wings. Therefore, it is a protest against the natural restrictions on man. Now, in the novel, the artist figure also blends with the Prometheus figure or the rebel figure. So, at the beginning of the novel, in that doggerel, apologize, pull out his eyes, there we see the image of Prometheus, who was chained to a rock, and eagles came and pecked at the body of Prometheus, torturing it. torturing him. So then later we have the allusion to Satan, for example in the phrase non serviam. Now Satan is also a rebel figure, therefore Stephen, when he identifies himself with the Satan figure, he is actually identifying himself with the rebel figure. Okay. So you have to talk about this and use of myth and archetype. So I told about myth archetype, that is when you refer to Jungian archetypes. For example, the image of the anima, the different girl figures or female figures, all these figures they tend to merge in Stephen's psyche. So whether it is Emma Clary or Virgin Mary or the prostitute, or the bird girl, they all they stand for the mother archetype according to Jung. And the mother archetype is also a symbol of creativity, as I told you, and a woman is an image of generation, creativity. And just today we read how Stephen in chapter 5 also thinks of the image of Virgin Mary being pregnant by the being made pregnant by God. Similarly, it is an allusion to the process of a poet being inspired by God. So, creativity, generation, giving birth, the biological process stands symbolically for artistic creativity for Stephen. Then you have to talk about the water image, which also according to Jung stands for mother or for regeneration and so on. We talk about how the anima finally finds its representation in the bird girl image, where the bird symbol, which was a symbol for flight in this novel, is amalgamated with the girl symbol, the girl image, which is the image for anima or desire, or we may say sexuality, which is sublimated into artistic creativity. Stephen's aesthetic theory. So today yesterday in the last class and today we discussed Stephen's aesthetic theory, which is derived from Aquinas, and yet it is different. And I have this kind of noted down here in one of these notes. The aesthetic theory, it is a functional aspect. For Stephen, art and aesthetic theory stand as a substitute for religion. His aesthetic theory is the climax of his story. His search for identity and vocation is new religion. Having as a climax an aesthetic theory is peculiar to Künstler Roma. The aesthetic theory has also the psychological purpose of fulfillment of Stephen's quest. The aesthetic theory substitutes Roman Catholicism for Stephen. The final epiphany, the rose of art from Roma della Rose, is identified with Dante's cosmic rose. Thus, art and Christianity are merged. Right. Then, integrity for Aquinas is a metaphysical concept, meaning a certain combination of qualities innate in every nature. Stephen's integrity is non-metaphysical, wholeness of a work of art and aesthetic wholeness. Consonantia for Aquinas is harmony between the parts of the whole. That is, Aquinas talks about qualities. For Stephen, consonantia is the rhythm of structure, as in abstract painting. Claritas for Aquinas, a perception of the wonder of beauty. Stephen, claritas is not a perception of God, but a perception first felt by the artist, inherent in the work of art, received by the recipient. So, claritas for Stephen is perception of the work of art, but received by the recipient, but perception of what? This material question was not raised. So, This is an indication that Stephen's aesthetic theory is very similar to art for art's sake theory. Because Stephen does not raise the question, what is perceived. So, according to Aristotelian theory of mimesis, the world is represented through art, through imitation. But Stephen's theory does not give any importance to this idea of reality as such. Are there any distance between Joyce and Stephen? So Joyce always maintains a distance with Stephen the character, and he stands at some kind of a mocking distance because Stephen is represented in this novel as often failing in writing good poems. As if the author is laughing at the character, and later he of course represents him in Ulysses as a failed poet. So unlike other conventional autobiographical novels where the author empathizes with the protagonist, in this novel we see that there is an ironical distance between the author and the protagonist. Alienation and individuality, that is repeatedly referred to in the novel, how as an artist from his childhood Stephen felt alienated from others, from his family, from his friends, so he always felt differently, and that is an indication of his individuality. Psychoanalytical interpretation of the novel, so this is actually loaded with psychoanalytical interpretations because the growth of Stephen's psyche is described or depicted with the development of his libido according to the Freudian theory of the development of a child's psyche, where the libido starts operating from a very early stage of infancy. So if we remember that even the first scene or the first very few pages of the novel, when baby Stephen, who is in an embryonic stage, he looks at his father's face and finds that it is hairy, and unlike his mother's face, which is not hairy, and his mother has a sweet smell, unlike his father. So the suggestion that Stephen would have an attraction for the mother, and later reference to Stephen being bullied by other boys when they asked him, does he kiss his mother before going to bed or not. So this closeness between Stephen and his mother, which suggests an Oedipal complex, and his sense of hostility towards his father, which is also represented in various chapters. For example, when they visit Cork, his father breaks down and weeps, thinking of his youth, and his father also becomes financially very unstable. So we have seen the collapse of the paternal figure. So Joyce represented both the obsession towards mother, then then hostility towards father, and his constant search of girl figures, which is a projection of his libido, but at the same time his attempt to sublimate that libido into art. So there is an essay on this psychological interpretation, psychoanalytical interpretation of the novel by Sheldon Breivik. The name of the essay is The Disjunctive Structure of Joyce's Portrait. If possible, I will try to send it to you. So a number of good essays are in the book. A Critical History of a Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, edited by R.B. Karshner. Short answer or short questions: bird symbolism, rose symbolism, Emma Cleary, Count of Monte Cristo, Debord the lineage, Stephen's views on language, on religion, on politics. Right. So these have all been covered by my discussion. Okay. So there is no more time left. If you have any questions, you can ask me.